Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Here's your first installment of AP Euro with the Flipped Classroom. And we're going to start off with the Renaissance today. Renaissance, of course, meaning the rebirth. And so we're getting to what does this whole idea of Renaissance mean? What's really funny is that this term Renaissance didn't really exist at the time. When this was going on in the 13, 14, 1500s, nobody said we were having a Renaissance. We were just having a right now. The guy that actually coins this term is a guy named Jacob Burckhardt, this dude right here with the awesome looking bow tie. He wrote a book. He was a professor at the University of Berlin and wrote a book in 1860 called The Civilization, the Renaissance of Italy. And so he was studying this idea of social history, the politics, humanism, which we'll get into later on, art, culture, all that kind of good stuff. And he said, look, we can draw a direct contrast, a line in the sand, if you will, between this period of quote-unquote Renaissance and the Middle Ages. And so he said there are now two distinct periods in time. We're going to read his stuff later on and see what we think if that's true or not. Okay, we'll get to that later. But why is this whole thing important, though? That's a big question. And why this is really important is because this idea of Renaissance is now considered the beginning of modern Europe. It's a huge shift away from the medieval ages of how things are doing, right? And so this new era is out here. The Middle Ages were so much more about, we're going to scratch along until we die, and, kings are going to get rich and all that kind of stuff. And now we're looking at these new issues of philosophy and ideals and new literature and writings. We're making new art. We're changing our thoughts and idea of religion. We see new technology and new ideas of family and marriage. All this kind of stuff was changing. And it's changing because of a new attitude. We're going to this term right down here. Y'all gotta know this term, guys. Something called the secular attitude. And the secular means not church-based. During the days of the Middle Ages, everything was still church-based. It doesn't matter what happened, okay? Sun came up, God did it, okay? Plague came, oh, God's pissed, right? Guy became king, God wanted him to, all right? And so now we're starting to become more secular. The idea that maybe there's more to this than God want to make it happen. Whether it be how people think, how people act, or how you should act for that matter. And so that's what the whole secular idea is a non-religious way of looking at things. Now, part of this happens because of what's changing in the church. And so part of the 1400s, the big question was who should be in charge of the church? Should be the people who are at the church, or the hierarchy of the church, or the Pope. Now understand, the Pope controlled so much of daily life. The church controlled over 2/3 of the land in medieval Europe. And they controlled much of daily life, what you did, your taxes you paid, all that kind of stuff. And they had their own government system that operated outside of the secular or the political system in Europe. You see the hierarchy down here on the bottom left-hand side. You're the Pope, or the Cardinal of Rome, at the very, very top, who's elected by the College of Cardinals, which met in Rome. And then after that, you have this areas of land. This archbishop controls a big chunk of land, which is then broken up to bishoprics, which are then priests and deacons, and the laity are kind of like your people who help out in church, that kind of stuff, okay? The clerics, all the people in the church, they have their own separate legal system. So they actually answer to a different set of laws than everybody else. And because you have all this stuff going on, all this land being built, being bought, and all these big churches being made, you got to have taxes too. So tithing, giving 10% of what you earn, becomes a big part of this whole thing as well. And so there's taxes for everything you do, every sacrament you get. A lot of money, okay, is going to this church here. And taxation is that problem. I mean, people are like, wow, this is kind of sucks, right? Because, I'm living here in squalor, and, the clerics did pretty good, okay? And actually, clerices latios, okay, please forgive my Latin. You'll find out my Latin is pretty terrible this year, meant no taxes for the clerics. So the regular people were not fans. They're like, hey, these priests and bishops and all that kind of stuff, what the heck, man? You don't gotta pay taxes. You have a separate legal system. You can do whatever you want to do, okay? And so this unum sanctum Also, that the Pope is the head of the church and people got to follow him for salvation, and all this kind of change are happening. Now, even before we get to the era of the Renaissance, we have what's called the Avian Papacy. This is in 1309, and you have Pope Clement V, and Rome got kind of issued because of political conditions, because of families issues there. He decides to, at the encouragement of the French king, just up and move the popeship. I'm not sure what you call it, right? The seat of the Pope and the College of the Cardinals all to France in the city of Avignon. And so when the court moved there, okay, and it was there for quite a few years, okay, until eventually you get Gregory the 11th, who then moved things back to Rome. Kind of a problem because the French group made their own pope again, and so for a short time here, you actually have multiple popes running the Catholic Church. So there's 2 and 3 popes, and it's kind of this big question of which one is, in charge. We even call them anti-popes, as kind of the idea like they're, the pope that was not the really true pope. So it's a big question of who is actually legitimate. Was it going to be the Roman Pope or was it going to be the French Pope? And so that was kind of the big questions we have. A lot of people were questioning, maybe we should put the power of the church with somebody else. Maybe it should be with the cardinals or somebody. And so all of a sudden we start seeing these big trends happening here with the church. With secularism happening, which is this idea of more non-faith, more evidence-based thinking, starts the Inquisition. So remember, we ever heard of the Spanish Inquisition, which we'll talk about a little later on. You were hunting out people who are the rabble-rousers, hunting out people who are the blasphemers, if you will, against the church. And that's what starts happening. We also start having these guys, and down here at the bottom we call the Renaissance popes. And Renaissance popes are, well, they're not very churchy, let's put it that way. They are free spending, don't act very religious at all. Some of them have done things like marry, have children outside of wedlock. One pope who's from the Medici family, she made his daughter pope for a while. Some popes have had murders. They actually contracted killings. Lots of crazy stuff happened, okay? They're also very, very free spending, though. If you've ever been to Italy, and I would love to pack us all up and take us to Rome for a couple days, it'd be great. I'll go fuel up the Sock Parade G5. But some of the great artwork comes out of this time, which we'll talk about artwork later on, like the Sistine Chapel, like St. Paul's Cathedral. All this comes out of this religious era where they are very, very free spending. Because the church has money, these popes spend it. And because they need more money, they need more taxes. And as part of you get little things like the sacraments, like communion and baptism, and all those kind of things, you have to start paying more and more money for them. People start questioning later on if we should be paying all this money for all this church stuff that's going on here. So that's our background, right? That's some of our background of what's happening as to why we have this shift, this move. The other part is it's not religious. It's not going to become economic in nature, okay? Now, the Renaissance, we say, first starts up in Italy, right? Around 1300, lasts till 1500s. We'll see a southern to northern shift happen with the Renaissance. It starts to move north in the 1450s. And honestly lasts until the 17th century, early 1600s with Shakespeare. Shakespeare is technically considered, part of the Renaissance. It's because of how people travel. Trade and travel and more roads, people actually leaving their homes and going different places, especially in the era after the plague, right? We're actually moving around again and stuff. And eventually trade and spread of information and roads leads us north. England's the last place because, guess what? They're an island. And so because England an island, well, it gets there last, okay? So that's where our Renaissance moves. So we start seeing these big Italian city-states pop up here. Now, there is no Italy, if you will, at this time. There's actually no Italy until the 19th century. It's always little city-states, okay? Little areas built around one city, a little area around it. You have Naples in the southern part here. You have the Papal States, which are literally ruled by the Pope. Florence, you have Venice, you have Milan, you have some little minor states in here. And so these guys named Signore, the despot, kind of the emperor, prince, king, not really king, you know what I mean, kind of this, ruler, if you will, or this oligarchy, a quote unquote republic ruled by the rich aristocrat, controlled Italy. Okay, and it was these guys became powerful because they were rich. They are rich because of some commenda, the merchant adventure. These guys bankrolled trading missions and merchant ships and all that kind of stuff, and got rich through the process of loaning money and banking and trade and sending goods back and forth to different places. And because of that, Italy is really our first place to urbanize and become more commercial in nature. Instead of being about subsistence farming as it was in most places in the Middle Ages, we're about banking and more modern type industries now instead. Now, these places competed with each other a lot. There was no unification, as I said, and so they actually hired condottieri, these mercenaries, to go and kill each other. And so some of the weak ones would ally together, build their own army of mercenaries, and go fight against another Italian city-state with other mercenaries. These guys fought a lot. I mean, I'm talking every single summer they fought, up until we call the Peace of Lodi, not Lodi, Wisconsin, Lodi in Italy, where they actually signed this peace agreement to last 40 years. That way we're not going to kill each other for 40 years so that we can get bigger, get more powerful, and make things better. But you can kind of see what kind of people they had here. Very rudimentary weapons, still using spears and pikemen. They had handgunners very early, kind of cannoners kind of stuff with it. These mercenaries made a lot of money by running these military operations. Now, the most important city-state you gotta know about here real quick is Florence. It's by far the most powerful and led by guild members. Here's the Medici family. The Medici got their money through banking and textiles. They were out trading textiles from wool, cotton from India, silks from Asia, all kinds of they were trading back and forth. And Cosimo Medici was actually kind of the patriarch of this family, who kind of got this banking thing together. He was loaning money to different people back and forth and made a ton of money off this. Lorenzo came around later on as a huge patron of the arts. The way you showed off your money at this time was with the artwork you purchased. You had the famous artists make statues and paint your portrait and hung them in your house. I mean, you didn't have to have a big fancy car or cool clothes. You had to have a lot of artwork hanging in your house to prove that you are truly the richest person. So early on, Florence, because of the Medici family, is kind of the center of the Renaissance. And so their money brings on all these thinkers and artists and all that kind of stuff to make this really cool place happen. Other places like Milan had the Duchy of Milan with the Sforza. They famously used mercenaries for all their fighting. They fought against Venice and Florence. They're kind of considered like the troublemakers of Europe. They basically started a lot of wars because they couldn't advance like Florence could through banking and money. So they're like, screw it, let's just go kill people. I mean, by that way, they did do a lot of trading and stuff, but they couldn't keep up with all the money, that kind of stuff. So the Peace of Lodi kind of calmed them down a little bit. Rome here obviously was kind of the heart of the Papal States, and with the Pope being technically in charge of this whole thing. And this was just such a messy situation. I mean, this like the trashiest soap opera you can imagine was the Papal States. All right, you have Pope Alexander VI, this guy right here, who was the height of corruption. He was spending all kinds of money. He fathered multiple children with multiple wives, all that kind of stuff. You have Julius II, the warrior pope. So over here, the Pope literally led armies into battle. He tried to rebuild Rome, but he spent all his money on artwork and fancy stuff, and he never actually addressed any of the problems. Top it off, you have Leo X. Leo X was a very interesting pope who actually bankrupted the church by spending all the money on artwork. Yes, he bankrupted it. He's like an 18-year-old NBA draft pick, blows all his cash on money and cars, all kinds of stuff. In this case, he was blowing it all on artwork. Last but not least, you have Venice here. Venice, obviously, famously with the canals they had that was actually a republic led by the Doge. And the Doge was chosen by a council of senate and merchants. Okay, it's called a republic. It was more of an oligarchy, but whatever, it's fine. But it's actually kind of cool because they're kind of separated off because they have the canals running through the city. Huge trading power, great navy. Actually, one of the first places that had a true concept of citizenship, which meant you had all the rights that came with that citizenship. Lastly is Naples, the two Sicilies. Down here, Sicily is right. Naples is up here. it had a king. It was very backwards. We're going to see that northern Italy tends to be a lot more industrial, southern Italy more agricultural and kind of like behind northern Italy. And because that's invaded and controlled for most of history, actually, up until the 19th century, by France and Spain at different times. And so they have some problems that way. A couple quick things we talk about here is we talk about this is that we have Machiavelli. Machiavelli comes at the end of this whole thing here, but becomes very famous because of these political matters in what is now Italy. He wrote a book called The Prince for the New Medici Ruler after the Medici had initially kind of lost power and kind of came back. And so this guy actually writes this book for this new ruler after being fired. He was actually chilling in France at the time. And she said, we're in a different kind of place. We have to rule without Christian principles. We can't be a ruler and also, be a God-fearing man. And we're actually going to read some of Machiavelli later on, talk about how this has changed politics. But he has famous quotes like a time rulers should be like a lion and also like a fox. We have to be aggressive and cunning, all these things at once. So you can't kind of let morals dictate what you do. You have to basically be moral free. You have to do what you want to get what you want and be okay with doing that. Now, eventually, this whole thing starts falling apart, and falls apart because these guys kill each other all the time. Eventually, you have the French who started invading. Ludovico, who was Milan's leader, part of the Sforza families, kind of like stirred stuff up again, right? He encouraged Charles VIII, who was king of France, to invade Naples, take it over. Then once they got Naples, they started getting more and more and more. Florence tried to step in and appease and say, hey, just take part of it, but don't take the whole thing. And it led to a huge overthrow of the Medicis. They come back later on when Machiavelli is around, but were extremely weakened, and so we start seeing all these external invasions. Florence was just a really messed up place, especially when the French overthrow the Medici, and there's actually a guy here named Girolamo Savonarola, who is a monk, who actually kind of becomes the ruler of this place, and so he essentially argued that the whole reason why Florence was taken over was because of the lack of religion. And so he blamed it on paganism and moral decay and all those kind of things that happened. And essentially ran a theocracy. It was really bad. Like people, they burned paintings, they burned books, they burned all this kind of stuff. People were publicly punished for not being Christian, all that kind of stuff. And after the French left, he was imprisoned and burned to the stake because people didn't believe him in the end of what was kind of happening. We kind of see the Renaissance end politically in the 1520s in Italy for sure because of invasions again. Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor at this time, kind of based out of modern-day Venice area, Vienna, and the King of Spain were fighting over parts of this. He fought with France as well. And so essentially what happens is the Holy Roman Empire defeats France in Italy as they're fighting wars back and forth, and all the Holy Roman Emperor mercenaries, soldiers from Germany and Spain and parts of Italy aren't paid, and so when they're not paid, they decide to go and just sack or steal everything from Rome, and they really kind of destroy everything. And Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, tries to control stuff. He doesn't do a very good job of it. We'll talk about him later on. And it's a big mess. And so because of these invasions, the Renaissance kind of ends in Italy, continues on the rest of Europe. We're going to stop there for this part, guys. Went a little long. I'm sorry. We're going to stop there for now. Thank you for listening. We'll be back in class, talk more about this stuff later. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a good day.